There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes that the little girl he raised is gone. Not because she grew up, not because she moved away, but because something inside her died, and she chose to bury it without him. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when my daughter slid a white envelope across a coffee shop table and told me that my presence at her wedding would embarrass her. I'm David. I'm 52 years old. And this is the story of how I lost my daughter long before I ever had the chance to walk her down the aisle. Let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, you might think I'm some kind of monster. You might think that a man whose own child pays him to stay away from her wedding must have done something unforgivable. And maybe, in her eyes, I did. Maybe the unforgivable thing I did was work with my hands instead of my title. Maybe it was drive a 10-year-old truck instead of a leased German sedan. Maybe it was live in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of town instead of a gated community with a security code. Her name is Emily. Emily Marie Callahan, though she dropped the Callahan about 3 years ago when she met Jeremy. Jeremy is her fiancé. He comes from money. Old money. The kind of money that doesn't talk about how much it has because it assumes everyone already knows. His father is a retired surgeon. His mother sits on 3 different nonprofit boards. Their summer home is bigger than my entire life's earnings. I raised Emily alone. Her mother left when she was 2 years old. Just packed a bag one morning while I was at work and never came back. No note. No phone call. No explanation. Just a half-empty closet and a wedding ring left on the kitchen counter. I was 24 years old with a toddler, a high school diploma, and a job at an auto body shop. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have family nearby. My own parents had passed years before. I had nothing but a second-hand crib and a copy of What to Expect the First Year that I'd bought at a garage sale. But I had Emily, and for 18 years she was everything. I worked double shifts. I learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. I showed up to every parent-teacher conference with grease under my fingernails because I came straight from the shop. I packed her lunches. I sewed buttons back onto her school uniform. I sat with her when she had fevers, when she had heartbreaks, when she had nightmares about her mother coming back and leaving again. I was not a perfect father. I was not a rich father. But I was there. Every single morning. Every single night. I was there. When she got accepted to state college on a partial scholarship, I cried in my truck for 20 minutes before I went inside to celebrate with her. I had saved every penny I could for years, and it still wasn't enough to cover what the scholarship didn't. So I took out a loan against my retirement. I didn't tell her that. I didn't tell her that I'd be working until I was 75 to pay it back. I just smiled and told her I was proud of her. College changed her. It's supposed to, right? Kids are supposed to grow, to broaden their horizons, to meet people who show them a different world. I told myself that's all it was. The new clothes, the different way of speaking, the way she started to pull away from conversations about the neighborhood, about the shop, about the simple life we'd built together. I told myself it was normal. I told myself she was just becoming her own person. But somewhere in those 4 years, she also became someone else's version of what a daughter should be. And that version didn't have room for a father who smelled like motor oil and lived in a zip code most people pretended didn't exist. She met Jeremy in her junior year. He was in law school. His family had a lake house. They took ski trips to Colorado. He proposed on a rooftop overlooking the city with a diamond that probably cost more than my truck, my apartment, and my life savings combined. When she called to tell me, I could hear the champagne in her voice. I could hear the new world she'd stepped into. And for a moment, I felt something cold move through my chest. Not jealousy, not resentment, just a quiet, certain fear that I was about to be erased. The engagement lasted 14 months. In that time, I met Jeremy exactly 3 times. First time was at a dinner he took us to, a place where the waiter had an accent and the menu didn't have prices. I wore the only suit I own, the one I bought for my best friend's funeral 6 years ago. Jeremy was polite, distantly polite, the way you're polite to a cashier or a taxi driver. He asked about my work, nodded without listening, and spent the rest of the meal talking to Emily about a gala they were attending the following weekend. I sat there like a piece of furniture, An old, worn piece of furniture they hadn't gotten around to replacing yet. Second time was at Emily's apartment. I had driven 2 hours to bring her a birthday gift. Nothing fancy, just a photo album I'd made of her childhood. Pictures from her first day of kindergarten, her 5th grade science fair, her high school graduation. I'd spent weeks on it, cutting and arranging and labeling each photo by hand because I'm not good with computers and I wanted it to feel personal. When I got there, Jeremy was on the couch. He looked at the album like it was something that had washed up on shore. He said, "That's sweet," in a tone that made the word sweet sound like an insult. Third time was the worst. It was supposed to be a casual dinner at their place. Just the 3 of us. But when I arrived, there were other people there. Friends of Jeremy's. Couples in designer clothes who talked about stock options and vacation homes and the difficulty of finding good help. I stood in the corner with a glass of wine I didn't want, and I watched my daughter move through that room like she had been born in it. She laughed at jokes I didn't understand. She touched elbows and shoulders like a politician. And when she passed by me, she didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She just said, "Hey, Dad," and kept walking. I left early. She didn't notice. The wedding planning started about 8 months before the date. I wasn't involved in much of it, which I understood. Weddings are complicated. There are caterers and florists and seating charts. I didn't know anything about any of that, but I kept waiting for her to ask me something. Anything. Even just, "Dad, what color tie should Jeremy wear?" Something to make me feel like I was part of it. Something to make me feel like I wasn't just a biological footnote in the story of her new life. That call never came. Instead, I got a text message. A text message. "Dad, can we meet for coffee on Tuesday? There's something I need to discuss with you." I knew. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. There was something about the formality of it. The way she didn't say, "I love you" at the end. The way she didn't call it a chat or a catch-up. She said, "Discuss." Like I was a business associate. Like I was someone she needed to manage. That Tuesday, I showed up 15 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a table by the window. I watched people walk by outside. Young couples holding hands. A mother pushing a stroller. An old man feeding pigeons on a bench. I thought about all the Tuesdays I had spent in my life. Most of them at the shop. Some of them at the hospital when Emily was sick. None of them had ever felt like this. None of them had ever felt like a waiting room before surgery. Emily walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and tailored pants. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look older, more serious. She had an envelope in her hand. Beige. Unmarked. She sat down across from me without hugging me. Without kissing my cheek. Without even saying hello, really. She just placed the envelope on the table between us and started talking. "Dad," she said, "I need to be honest with you about something, and I need you to listen before you react." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. She took a breath. She looked at the envelope, then at me, then back at the envelope. And then she said the words that I will carry with me to my grave. Jeremy's family is very traditional. They have expectations. And the wedding is going to be, it's going to be full of important people. People from his father's firm. People from the country club. People who matter for our future. I waited. I knew what was coming, but I needed to hear her say it. "The thing is, Dad," she continued, and now her voice was softer, almost pitying, which somehow made it worse. "You don't really fit with that crowd, and I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true. You work with your hands. You live in a small apartment. You drive an old truck. And I love you for all of that, I do. But at the wedding, I need everything to be perfect. I need every single detail to reflect the life that Jeremy and I are building together." She pushed the envelope toward me. "There's $10,000 in there," she said. "It's from us. From Jeremy and me. We want you to take a trip somewhere. Go to the beach. Go to the mountains. Go anywhere you want. Just don't come to the wedding." I didn't speak. Couldn't. "It's not that I don't want you there," she added quickly, as if that made it better. "It's that I don't want you there the way you are. And I know that sounds terrible. I know that. But I've worked too hard to build this life, Dad. I've worked too hard to leave everything behind. And I can't have someone showing up to my wedding in a rented suit who doesn't know which fork to use. I can't have people whispering. I can't have Jeremy's mother making comments. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her touch was cold. Or maybe mine was. I don't know. Please don't hate me for this, she said. Please just take the money and go. For me. For my happiness. I looked at her for a long time. I looked at this woman who had once been a little girl who held my finger while she fell asleep. Who had once drawn me pictures with crayon and told me I was the best daddy in the whole world. Who had once cried on my shoulder because a boy at school said her shoes were old. And I tried to find her somewhere in the face that was looking back at me. I tried to find the Emily who used to run to the door when I came home from work, who used to wrap her arms around my legs and refuse to let go. I tried and I couldn't. So I did something that surprised us both. I picked up the envelope. I put it in my jacket pocket. And I said, "Okay." Emily blinked. "Okay. Okay." I said again. "If that's what you want. If that's what makes you happy. Then okay." She smiled. She actually smiled. Like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Like she had just cleared the final hurdle on the way to her perfect day. She stood up, leaned over, and kissed my cheek. It was a quick kiss. Practiced kiss. The kind of kiss you give someone when you're already thinking about your next appointment. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "You won't regret this. I promise." Then she walked out of the coffee shop and disappeared into the afternoon sun. I sat there for another hour. My coffee went cold. The waitress asked if I wanted a refill. I said no. I just sat there, staring at the spot where my daughter had been sitting, playing her words over and over in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. "You don't really fit with that crowd. I can't have someone showing up to my wedding in a rented suit. Please just take the money and go." I drove home that night in silence. No radio, no podcasts, no phone calls. Just the sound of the road and the sound of my own breathing and the sound of $10,000 in my jacket pocket. $10,000. That's what my daughter thought I was worth. That's what she thought it would cost to keep me away from the most important day of her life. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked to my bedroom, took off my shoes, and lay down on top of the covers. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about calling someone. My brother, maybe, or my old friend Louis from the shop. But what would I say? "Hey, my daughter just paid me not to come to her wedding." There's no response to that. There's no comfort for that. There's just the slow, grinding realization that you have been replaced. The wedding was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to decide what to do. 2 weeks to figure out how to live with a wound that hadn't even started to bleed yet. I didn't sleep that night, or the next night, or the night after that. I went to work. I fixed cars. I came home. I ate frozen dinners. I watched television without seeing it. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting rooms I'd lived in for 20 years. And then, 6 days before the wedding, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was late, almost 11 o'clock. I was sitting in my recliner, staring at a blank wall, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said. "Mr. Callahan?" The voice on the other end was young, nervous, male. "Yeah, this is Jeremy. Emily's Jeremy." My heart stopped. Not figuratively. I literally felt something seize in my chest. Jeremy had never called me. Never. Not once in the entire time he'd been with my daughter. Our interactions had been limited to those 3 meetings and a few obligatory text messages on Father's Day. For him to call me at 11 o'clock at night, 6 days before his wedding. Something was wrong. "Is Emily okay?" I asked, because no matter what she'd done, no matter how much she'd hurt me, she was still my daughter. And that instinct doesn't die just because someone breaks your heart. There was a pause. A long one. When Jeremy spoke again, his voice was different. Thinner. Shakier. Like he was trying not to cry. "Can I come over?" he asked. I'm in my car. I'm not far from your place. I need to talk to someone. And I don't know who else to call. I didn't say yes right away. I wanted to, but there was a part of me that was still angry, still hurt, still holding on to the image of my daughter sliding that envelope across the table. A part of me that wanted to say, "Why would you call me? I'm just the mechanic who doesn't fit with your crowd." But I didn't say that, because I heard something in his voice. Something real. Something raw. Something that sounded a lot like the way I'd been feeling for the past week. "Yeah," I said. "Come over. I'll leave the porch light on." He arrived 20 minutes later. I watched from my window as his car pulled up to the curb. It was a nice car. A black BMW. The kind of car that didn't belong on my street. But it was him. I could see him sitting in the driver's seat, both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. He sat there for almost a full minute. Just sitting. Just staring. Like he was trying to gather the courage to get out. Then he opened the door. He stepped out onto the sidewalk. And he looked up at my apartment. At the flickering porch light. At the chipped paint on the doorframe. At the window where I was standing, watching him. And that's when he started crying. I don't mean he shed a few tears. I mean he fell apart. His shoulders shook. His face crumpled. He covered his mouth with his hand like he was trying to hold the sound in. But it came out anyway. A broken, gasping sob that carried across the quiet street and went right through my chest. I opened the door before he even reached it. I stood in the doorway, and he looked at me with red, swollen eyes, and he said something I will never forget. He said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I stepped aside and let him in. I led him to my living room. I sat him down on my old couch. I handed him a glass of water that he didn't drink. And I waited. Took him a long time to calm down. He kept apologizing. Kept saying he was sorry over and over again like a prayer. I didn't push him. I didn't ask questions. I just sat in my recliner and let him cry. Because I've been a father for 32 years. And one thing I've learned is that sometimes people don't need you to fix anything. Sometimes they just need you to be there while they fall apart. Finally, when his breathing slowed and his hands stopped trembling, he looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem. "She told me you weren't coming," he said. "Emily. She told me you decided not to attend the wedding. She said you were embarrassed to be around our friends. She said you felt out of place and that you'd rather take a trip than sit through a fancy ceremony." I opened my mouth to respond, but he kept going. "And I believed her," he said. "Why wouldn't I believe her? She's my fiancé. I love her. I trusted her. But tonight I was going through some paperwork in her office. Wedding stuff, vendor contracts and seating charts and all that. And I found something." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hand was shaking as he handed it to me. "I found a copy of the check," he said. "A cashier's check for $10,000. Made out to you, with a note attached that said, 'Payment for non-attendance.'" I took the paper from him. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. But I looked at it anyway. I looked at my daughter's handwriting. At the cold, clinical way she had documented our transaction. At the way she had reduced 32 years of fatherhood to a line item in her wedding budget. "I confronted her," Jeremy continued, his voice cracking. "I asked her what it meant. And she tried to lie at first. She said it was a gift. She said you needed the money. But I kept pushing. And eventually, she told me the truth." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She told me she paid you to stay away. She told me she didn't want you at the wedding because you weren't successful enough. Because you didn't fit in. Because your presence would embarrass her in front of my family and our guests." He stopped. He looked down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Callahan, my father is a surgeon. My mother sits on boards. I grew up in a house where success was measured in square footage and stock portfolios. And I have spent my entire adult life trying to escape that. Trying to be different. trying to care about things that matter more than money and status. He looked up at me. Tears were streaming down his face again, but he didn't try to hide them this time. When I met Emily, she told me her father was a mechanic. She said it with shame in her voice, and I didn't understand why. I still don't understand why. You raised her alone. You worked double shifts. You gave up everything so she could have a better life. And she was ashamed of you? He shook his head slowly, like he was trying to process something his brain couldn't quite accept. I've been thinking about my own father a lot lately, Jeremy said. About how he never came to my baseball games. About how he worked late every night of my childhood. About how he missed my graduation because he had a board meeting. About how the only times he told me he loved me were at funerals and weddings, and even then it sounded like he was reading from a script. He reached out and put his hand on my knee. It was an awkward gesture, hesitant, but sincere. You showed up, Mr. Callahan. You showed up every single day. And my fiancé paid you to stay away from her wedding. Do you understand how insane that is? Do you understand how backwards? I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My throat was too tight. My chest was too full. I just sat there, holding the paper with my daughter's handwriting, feeling something shift inside me that I couldn't quite name. I called off the wedding, Jeremy said. I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was pale. His eyes were swollen. But there was something else there. Something resolute. Something that looked like the beginning of courage. I called it off tonight, he repeated. I told her I couldn't marry someone who treated their own father like that. I told her that if she could do this to you, she could do it to anyone. To me, to our future children, to anyone who didn't fit into her perfect picture. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the street, at his car, at the dark houses of a neighborhood he'd never bothered to visit before tonight. She didn't take it well, he said quietly. She said I was throwing everything away. She said I was choosing you over her. She said I didn't understand what I was doing. He turned back to face me. And maybe I don't, he said. Maybe I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. But I couldn't stand in that church, Mr. Callahan. I couldn't say, I do to someone who looked at you and saw a liability instead of a father. I couldn't build a life with someone who thought love had a dress code. He walked back to the couch and sat down heavily, like his legs had given out. I'm sorry, he said again. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I believed her when she said you didn't want to come. I'm sorry I let her make you feel like you weren't good enough. I sat in my recliner for a long time after that. The clock on the wall ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. And I thought about everything. About Emily. About her mother. About the envelope. About the $10,000 still sitting in my jacket pocket in the bedroom. About this young man sitting on my couch, crying over a family that wasn't even his. And then, for the first time in over a week, I felt something other than pain. I felt something other than shame. I felt something other than the cold, heavy weight of being unwanted. I felt seen. The next few days were chaos. Emily called me 17 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that started angry, then became pleading, then became desperate. In the first one, she screamed at me for ruining her life. In the 7th one, she sobbed and said she didn't mean what she'd said. In the 12th one, she told me she loved me and begged me to talk to Jeremy. In the 15th one, she said she would call off the wedding herself if I would just please pick up the phone. I didn't pick up. Not because I was being cruel. Not because I wanted to punish her. But because I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to have a conversation with someone who had looked me in the eyes and told me I wasn't good enough to be seen with her guests. I didn't know how to unhear those words. I didn't know how to go back to being the father who showed up no matter what, when showing up had been turned into a transaction. Jeremy stayed in touch. He came over twice more. We talked for hours. Not about Emily. Not about the wedding. Just about life. About work. About the things that matter and the things that don't. He told me about his childhood. About the loneliness of growing up rich but poor in all the ways that counted. I told him about raising Emily. About the sleepless nights and the secondhand clothes and the way I used to pretend I wasn't hungry so she could have the last piece of chicken. We were two men from two different worlds, sitting in a small apartment on the wrong side of town, finding out that we had more in common than we ever could have imagined. The wedding was supposed to be on a Saturday. A big church, 300 guests, a reception at a country club that didn't allow people like me through the front door. Instead, on that Saturday, I woke up alone in my apartment. I made myself a pot of coffee. I watched the morning news. And then, around 10 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. I opened it. Jeremy was standing there. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. No suit, no tie, no expensive cologne. "Come on," he said. "I'm taking you to breakfast." I raised an eyebrow. "Breakfast?" "Yeah," he said. "There's a diner around the corner. The one with the sign that's missing half its letters. I saw it when I was driving over. It looks like the kind of place where nobody cares which fork you use." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and followed him outside. The diner was exactly the kind of place I'd spent my whole life in. Cracked vinyl booths. A jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. A waitress named Flo who called everyone Han and didn't write anything down. Jeremy ordered pancakes. I ordered eggs and toast. We sat in a booth by the window and ate breakfast while the world moved on without us. "I've been thinking," Jeremy said between bites, "about what comes next." I nodded. I'd been thinking the same thing. "I still love her," he said quietly. "I don't know if that makes me stupid or just human, but I do. I love the person I thought she was, and I keep wondering if that person is still in there somewhere, buried under all the noise." I put down my fork. I looked at this young man who had turned his whole life upside down because of a principle, because he couldn't stomach watching a father get erased. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "She's my daughter," I said slowly, "and I love her. I've loved her since the moment I held her in the delivery room, covered in blood and screaming like she was angry at the world for existing. I've loved her through tantrums and report cards and teenage rebellion. I've loved her through every stupid decision she's ever made. And I will probably love her until the day I die." I took a sip of my coffee. It was terrible. Perfect. "But love doesn't mean I have to accept being treated like a doormat," I said. "Love doesn't mean I have to pretend that envelope didn't happen. Love doesn't mean I have to show up to a wedding where I've been explicitly uninvited. Sometimes love means stepping back. Sometimes love means letting someone hit rock bottom so they can figure out what they actually want to stand on." Jeremy was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and shook my hand. "I'm glad I found that check," he said. "I'm glad I know the truth." I squeezed his hand. "Me too." We didn't talk about the future. We didn't make plans. We just finished our breakfast, paid the bill, and walked back to my apartment. Jeremy got in his car and drove away. I went inside and sat in my recliner. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. 3 weeks later, Emily showed up at my door. She looked different. Thinner. Paler. Like she hadn't been sleeping or eating or taking care of herself. She was wearing sweatpants and an old hoodie. No makeup. No fancy bag. No designer sunglasses. Just my daughter, standing on my doorstep, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for days. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room. She looked around at the same old furniture, the same old walls, the same old life she'd been so desperate to escape. And then she sat down on my couch and started to cry. Not the performative tears she'd shed in the coffee shop. Not the calculated waterworks she'd probably used on Jeremy. Real tears. Ugly tears. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and broken and desperate. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know how I became this person. I don't know why I thought any of that was okay." I didn't say anything. I just sat in my recliner and let her talk. "Jeremy won't take me back," she said. "He says he needs time. He says he doesn't know if he can trust me again. And I don't blame him. I don't blame either of you. I was horrible. I was cruel. I let money and status and other people's opinions turn me into someone I don't even recognize. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. I told my friends what I did, she continued. I told them about the envelope, about the $10,000, about the things I said to you. And do you know what they said? They said it was smart. They said you would have been an embarrassment. They said I was just being practical. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. And that's when I realized that I had surrounded myself with the wrong people. That I had spent 4 years building a life based on everything that doesn't matter. That I had traded my father for a seat at a table where nobody actually wanted me to sit. She stood up. She walked over to my recliner and knelt down in front of me. She took my hands in hers. They were cold, trembling. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. Not yet. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have to earn it. But I am asking you to let me try. I'm asking you to let me be your daughter again. Not the daughter who's embarrassed of you. Not the daughter who cares about which fork to use. Just your daughter. The one who used to draw you pictures. The one who used to run to the door when you came home. The one who thought you hung the moon. I looked at her. I looked at this woman who had broken my heart in a way I didn't know was possible. And I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw the little girl who used to hold my finger while she fell asleep. The little girl who believed her daddy could fix anything. I reached out and touched her face. I wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. I don't know if I can forget what happened, I said. I don't know if I can ever look at that coffee shop the same way. But I know that you're my daughter. And I know that you're here. And I know that's worth something. She collapsed into my arms. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed like she hadn't let herself sob since she was a child. And I held her. I held her the way I'd held her when she was 2 years old and her mother had just walked out. I held her the way I'd held her when she was 12 and the girls at school had been mean to her. I held her the way I'd held her when she was 18 and terrified of leaving for college. I held her because that's what fathers do. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The sun was setting by the time she stopped crying. The room was dark except for the orange light coming through the window. Emily pulled back and looked at me. Her face was a mess of tears and mascara, but she was smiling. A small, fragile smile. The kind of smile that doesn't know if it's allowed to exist yet. I still have the money, I said. She blinked. What? The $10,000, I said. I never spent it. Still in the envelope. In my bedroom. She started to say something, but I held up my hand. I'm not giving it back, I said. Not yet. I'm gonna hold on to it. And maybe someday when you've figured out who you want to be, we'll figure out what to do with it together. Maybe we'll donate it to a scholarship fund for kids whose parents work double shifts. Maybe we'll use it to buy a new couch. I don't know. But right now it's a reminder. A reminder of what happens when we forget what actually matters. Emily nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't make excuses. She just nodded. I'd like that, she said quietly. We sat in the dark for a while after that. Father and daughter. Two people who had lost each other and were trying to find their way back. It wasn't easy. It wouldn't be easy for a long time. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself overnight. But we were trying. And sometimes trying is enough. Jeremy and Emily eventually found their way back to each other. Took months. Months of therapy. Months of hard conversations. Months of Emily proving that she was more than the person she'd been at that coffee shop table. Jeremy didn't forgive her quickly. He didn't forgive her easily. But he loved her. And love, when it's real, is patient. Love, when it's real, is willing to wait. They got married the following spring. Small ceremony. Backyard of Jeremy's parents' house. 50 guests. No country club. No 300 people who didn't actually care about them. Just family. Just friends. Just the people who had stood by them through the chaos. And me? I walked her down the aisle. She wore a simple white dress. No train. No veil. She had flowers in her hair that she'd picked from a field the day before. And when she took my arm at the start of that aisle, she leaned in and whispered something in my ear. She said, "Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad. Thank you for showing me that love isn't about what you have. It's about who you show up for. I didn't cry. I told myself I wouldn't cry. But when she looked at me with those eyes, those same eyes that had looked at me from a hospital bassinet 33 years ago, I felt the tears come anyway. I'll always show up for you, kiddo, I said. Even when you don't want me to. She laughed. It was a real laugh. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. We walked down that aisle together. Jeremy was waiting at the end. He smiled when he saw us. Not his polite smile. Not his distant smile. A real one. The kind of smile that reaches the eyes. He shook my hand before Emily reached him. He held it for a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything. I nodded. I let go of Emily's arm. I watched her take her place beside the man she loved. And I sat down in the front row, next to Jeremy's parents, who had welcomed me into their home like I'd always belonged there. The ceremony was short. The reception was simple. There was barbecue instead of filet mignon. There was a playlist instead of a DJ. There were mismatched chairs and mason jars and fairy lights strung between trees. It wasn't the wedding Emily had planned. It was better. At the end of the night, when most of the guests had gone home and the fairy lights were starting to flicker, Emily found me sitting on a bench near the garden. She sat down next to me and leaned her head on my shoulder. I'm glad you were here, she said. I'm glad you didn't take that trip. I put my arm around her. I thought about the envelope, about the $10,000, about the coffee shop, about the look on her face when she told me I wasn't successful enough to be seen with her guests. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go. There's nowhere else I would have been, I said, and I meant it. The envelope is still in my bedroom. I never spent the money. I never will. It sits in my nightstand drawer, tucked between an old Bible and a photograph of Emily on her first day of kindergarten. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and hold it in my hands. Not because I'm angry anymore, not because I'm holding a grudge, but because I need to remind myself of what almost happened, of how close I came to losing my daughter forever, of how a $10,000 check almost cost me something that no amount of money could ever buy. Emily doesn't know I still have it. Maybe someday I'll tell her. Maybe someday we'll laugh about it. Or maybe we won't. Maybe some things are too heavy to turn into jokes. But here's what I've learned. Here's what I want you to take away from this story. Success is not measured by the size of your bank account. It's measured by the people who show up when you have nothing left to give. Love is not a transaction. It's not something you earn or buy or trade. It's something you choose. Every single day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And sometimes, the person who breaks your heart is the same person who will spend the rest of their life trying to put it back together. Sometimes, redemption is possible. Sometimes, people change. Sometimes, the little girl who held your finger while she fell asleep grows up to be someone you don't recognize. But that doesn't mean she's gone forever. It just means she's lost. And lost people can be found. If you're willing to leave the porch light on. My name is David. I'm 52 years old. I work with my hands. I drive an old truck. I live in a small apartment on the south side of town. And I am the luckiest man in the world. Because my daughter came home. And that's worth more than $10,000. That's worth everything.